During the 2000s, numerous rumors circulated about popular anime titles receiving Hollywood film adaptations. Remember Cowboy Bebop starring Keanu Reeves? What about the countless attempts to make an American Akira? That live-action Robotech movie's gonna have to come out eventually. Harmony Gold wouldn't just promise something and then not deliver on it. One of these endeavors that has always fascinated me, and possibly only me, were the attempts to adapt Shotaro Ishinomori's Cyborg 009 as a Hollywood picture. Cyborg 009 is such an interesting choice, lacking the notoriety of something like Cowboy Bebop or Akira, both of which are still relevant in anime circles to this day. And while other titles rumored for the Hollywood treatment may not have the acclaim they once did, like Robotech or Battle of the Planets, they were at least popular enough in their time that it makes sense they would enter the conversation. Cyborg 009, on the other hand, has had various releases in the West, with the most successful being the 2001 anime, which aired on Toonami in 2003. However, it was eventually moved to a 1 AM time slot due to low ratings. 009 has its fans, but it's a niche within a niche. And the rumors of its planned live-action movie failed to even generate as much speculation as the rumors around Cowboy Bebop, Akira, or even Battle Angel Alita, whatever that is. To find out how this project came to be, the steps to promote it, and its eventual downfall, I sat down with the film's producer, FJ DeSanto, and former Ishimori Pro Executive Vice President Masayasu Takigawa for the full inside story. Before we can talk about manga, we need to talk about comic books. In 1979, comic book fan turned writer Michael Uslan bought the film rights to Batman, stating that he wanted to eventually produce dark and serious Batman movies that dispelled the camp image of Batman proliferated by the 1960s Adam West interpretation. Uslan eventually got his wish, as he was a producer on both Tim Burton Batman films and has been credited as a producer or executive producer on every Warner Bros. Batman movie as of 2024. Following the box office bomb that was Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin in 1997, the franchise went dormant, but during that time, Uslan continued to work as a producer on various comic book film adaptations. Around 2005, after having worked as a producer on the film Constantine, Uslan founded a company called Comic Book Movies, a company dedicated to, you guessed it, producing comic book movies. The company didn't last very long, but it had several investors, including a Japanese conglomerate called Itochu. At the time, Ishimori Productions, the company that owns the copyright to all manga author Shotaro Ishinomori's published works, was one of the many companies under the Itochu Group label. With Itochu's investment in comic book movies, they requested that Uslan's team develop Ishimori titles for film. This presented a problem. Uslan and his team were dedicated comic book fans and had a strong grasp on Western pop culture, but none of them knew anything about manga. But there was one exception. FJ DeSanto was hired in the 90s right out of college, having impressed Uslan's business partner, Benjamin the Old Man Melniker, with his knowledge of comic books at a time when the average American probably couldn't tell you Iron Man's real name. DeSanto would later become an asset for Uslan, as his nerdy interests reached beyond the world of comics, from pro wrestling to Chinese kung fu movies, and of course, Japanese anime. DeSanto's love of anime started with Star Blazers and Battle of the Planets in the late 70s, but even into the 2000s he kept an eye on popular titles, as his nephew was the right age to get into Naruto and Bleach when they started playing on Cartoon Network. As the only person at the company versed in anime and manga, Uslan put DeSanto in charge of developing Ishimori titles. To clarify, Ishimori Productions didn't specify a particular title they wanted adapted. That was up to the discretion of comic book movies. But what DeSanto found was that many of the characters available to him were inherently very Japanese, which would make them harder to sell to a Western audience. With this in mind, DeSanto gravitated towards Cyborg 009, as it was, as DeSanto himself described it, a multicultural franchise featuring a team of superheroes from all different countries and backgrounds. 009 was also great for adaptation because there were no strings attached. While Ishimori Pro had creative control over most of Ishinomori's characters, some required additional negotiating as the rights were split between other parties, and one was entirely off the table. DeSanto was told by then Ishimori Pro Executive Vice President Masayasu Takigawa, who was spearheading this overseas development project, that creative control of Kamen Rider was split between Ishimori Pro and Toei, and aside from Toei, Bandai also had to be considered. Bandai was a major sponsor for the Kamen Rider franchise, and at the time was a minority shareholder of Ishimori Pro. This meant that any decision involving Kamen Rider needed the express approval of Bandai. Even with Kamen Rider off the table, DeSanto continued with his heart set on Cyborg 009. DeSanto met with various writers and artists looking for the right person to pen the screenplay and give the project a strong visual direction. He cycled through a list of names before someone brought up Peter Chung, recalling that at some point he had mentioned he was a fan of the franchise. Chung is probably best known as the creator of the MTV animated series Aeon Flux, but he's also well known for having worked on a handful of American-Japanese co-productions, such as The Animatrix and Reign the Conqueror. In fact, at the time, Chung was already working on Western adaptations of two other Japanese properties, Hideyuki Kikuchi's Wicked City and Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy, only the latter of which would materialize in the form of the 2009 Imaji movie. DeSanto flew from New York to LA to meet with him, where he explained the situation and commissioned art of the characters and a story take. Chung's story wasn't exactly what DeSanto expected, focusing on existential themes of what it really means to be human. That said, DeSanto still loved Chung's output.
It just looked so cool, and he's so, introverted and weird that, you don't want to fuck with him, because he's so brilliant.
Unfortunately, around this time, DeSanto began to feel it was time to leave comic book movies. He had been working for Michael Uslan for over 10 years, and he was finally producing his first movie, The Spirit. By 2008, comic book movies was falling apart, which accelerated DeSanto's exit from the company.
Sort of while I was gone, the company sort of fell apart for reasons nothing to do with the level I was at. It was the business level, investors arguing, and I had already sort of started to plan my exit from Michael, because I had been with him a very, very long time, over 10 years. And, and I was producing my first movie, and I said I had to parlay that into something else. But the thing that was sort of keeping me was the Ishimori stuff.
He returned from Albuquerque, the primary shooting location of The Spirit, to New York, where he worked for a company that developed IPs for television and film. But within 6 months, Takigawa was knocking on his door.
I wasn't there, but they said, we walked past your office and there was a bunch of Cyborg 009 toys there. I said, yeah. And he goes, we didn't give you those toys. I said, I had those toys before I even met you. And he went, I think you should come work for us. I think we should continue what we were doing with Michael, but just with you. And this was the opportunity to sort of break out as an independent producer, because I became a paid consultant for Ishimori Pro. So suddenly I was back in Japan, picking up where I left off.
DeSanto was on board, but the downside was they would have to start from scratch. They didn't have the rights to anything developed by comic book movies, including Peter Chung's art.
So the Peter Chung stuff, unfortunately, sort of just never got the shot it deserved. We never shopped it. I don't think we ever shopped it. I don't think we shopped it. I don't think we tried to sell it. I think we developed it, and then the company went to hell.
DeSanto started over, developing 009 alongside a handful of other Ishinomori titles like Android Kikaider, The Skullman, Robot Detective, and 0091. By this point, the film Iron Man had become a massive hit, and this new take would weave in elements from other Ishinomori properties, creating a sort of Ishinomori shared universe. Takigawa loved the idea of an Ishinomori shared universe and said that the idea of a combined world of Ishinomori characters was an idea that had been floating around Ishimori Pro even before Marvel's Iron Man. DeSanto recruited Brad Cramp, who had produced movies like Gattaca and the Nicolas Cage film Lord of War, to write the film treatment. They were once again making headway, but a new issue quickly arose. The issue was that there was no easy way to pitch the project. Walking into a studio and presenting a Japanese manga from the 60s and saying, "The movie's in here," wasn't going to cut it. The pair came up with the idea to create a graphic novel as a sort of Trojan horse. The graphic novel could be a cool book on its own, but it could also be a tool for spoon-feeding the film treatment to Hollywood executives. Ishimori Productions had already signed off on the film treatment, so why not adapt it as a graphic novel? DeSanto and Cramp partnered with Archaia, a graphic novel publisher known at the time for their high-quality physical releases, and recruited Marcus To to create the art for the graphic novel. Every step was approved by Ishimori Pro, with the only common recurring criticism being to make 009's hair thicker or to add more layers, as they said. It's possible this request stems back from Toei's 60s adaptations of Cyborg 009, which removed the main character's iconic bangs that always covered one of his eyes. This was received poorly by fans, with Ishinomori himself publicly stating, "That isn't my character." Ishimori Pro would even send back sketches with pencil marks over Joe's face to show exactly how the hair should look. The book took about 18 months to produce and retells the origin of Cyborg 009, adapting the first two arcs of the manga, the Birth and Assassins arcs. There are a few notable changes. While the assassins in the manga include cyborgs numbered 0010 through 13, Only the 0010 brothers and 0013 appear in the graphic novel. DeSanto says the omission of 0011 and 0012 was due to a limited page count, though he liked the idea that Black Ghost had various operations happening across the globe, so those could be assassins working on other missions. Another major change was that the Cyborg's archenemy, the Skull, was portrayed as an ordinary human named Sakar, who only becomes a cyborg as a last resort to defeat the heroes in the final act. According to DeSanto, Ishimori Pro didn't want them to use the name Skull, though he wasn't completely sure why. This is interesting because the Skull's name has frequently been mistranslated across various official localizations. The Tokyo Pop release of the manga refers to him as Scar, while the 2001 anime and the most recent Cyborg 009 live show romanize his name as Scarl. The Netflix release of Cyborg 009 vs. Devilman is, to my knowledge, the only official release that refers to him as the Skull. While I had assumed this was just an unchecked mistranslation, it seems Ishimori Pro wants his name to be obfuscated for some reason. Another demand from Ishimori Pro was that the end of the book must feature the iconic scene of 009 and 002 burning up as they re-enter Earth's atmosphere. In the original manga, this scene appears at the end of the Yomi arc, a much later arc which served as Ishinomori's original planned ending for the series, and depicts 009 and 002's death after defeating Black Ghost in outer space. While the scene is recreated at the end of the graphic novel, 009 and 002 both live in this version, and it's assumed Ishimori Pro wanted this scene included because it's one of the most well-known scenes in all of Cyborg 009, often getting referenced in other anime and manga such as Masami Kurumada's Beat X and Studio Trigger's Kill la Kill. There's one last addition to the graphic novel at the behest of Ishimori Pro that might surprise readers for more than one reason. As the story concludes, Sakar is defeated and left drifting in space. Then, he's seemingly saved as he's taken aboard a mysterious space station. Once inside, he pleads for a second chance, only to be told that he's no longer of use to Foundation X, followed by a gunshot. For those unaware, Foundation X is the antagonist organization of Kamen Rider Double, a then recent installment in the Kamen Rider franchise. DeSanto claims this was a last-minute addition to the graphic novel requested specifically by Takigawa, and when asked if it would be a problem since it's related to Kamen Rider, he simply said not to worry about it. Ishimori Pro, but especially Takigawa's, insistence on using Foundation X in such a way led to DeSanto developing the universe where each title would have its own story, only to reveal that somewhere behind the scenes, Foundation X was somehow involved.
Takigawa was the one who was like, connected all to Foundation X. And we were like, okay, we're not gonna get in trouble with this? He's like, no. And we didn't, by the way.
In this interpretation, Foundation X essentially takes the role Black Ghost held in the original Cyborg 009 manga, as an organization whose goal is to create a perpetual state of war. The Black Ghost in the graphic novel is now positioned as a fixture of that, the arm that focused on creating scientifically enhanced soldiers. In other titles like 0091, we'd see how these evil organizations utilize cyborgs to instigate war through other means, such as espionage, with all groups essentially operating at the behest of Foundation X in one way or another. The book was released in the US and Japan on the same day, January 25th, 2013, Ishinomori's birthday, with the Japanese cover featuring alternate art and being retitled to Cyborg 009 USA. To promote the book in Japan, a music video was created with the song Seeds by the band Lulu, which is currently available to watch on YouTube. Knowing how little exposure Ishinomori's manga had in the West, DeSanto and Takigawa made a deal with digital comic distributor Comixology to release a handful of Ishinomori titles on their platform. This included the first 10 volumes of Cyborg 009, Kamen Rider, Kikaider, Inazuman, and the Skullman, with the Archaea graphic novel also being made available following its physical release a few months later. These were never intended to make a profit, but rather they knew as the project got closer to fruition, people would become curious and try looking up Ishinomori manga. When they did, DeSanto and his team wanted people to have a handful of popular titles accessible in English, both so they could read them for themselves, but more importantly, to show them that these characters had a long and storied history in their home country. The book sold well, and around that time, Archaea was bought by a company called Boom Studios. At the time, Boom Studios had a first-look deal with 20th Century Fox, and Fox liked the Cyborg 009 proposal, favorably comparing it to the X-Men. Fox was so dedicated, not only did they make an offer to option Cyborg 009 as a big-budget Hollywood film, but they also agreed to fund the next 2 graphic novels in the series. Many fans noticed that in the Cyborg 009 graphic novel, there's a scene in Japan where Japanese text is visible that reads, "Who is the Skullman?" This was because after Cyborg 009, the Skullman was the most developed of the titles and was planned as their next graphic novel release. Who is the Skullman was the tagline for the book, and it would have been done in the style of a horror mystery centering around the question of the Skullman's true identity. DeSanto collaborated with Todd Farmer, a writer who had worked on horror movies like Jason X and My Bloody Valentine 3D, to develop a story take that would become the graphic novel and eventual feature. As for the third graphic novel, this would have been Cyborg 009 Part 2, but DeSanto claims nothing was ever planned for that installment as the project never progressed that far. At the same time that the original Cyborg 009 graphic novel was being written, Ishimori Pro was domestically working on the film 009 Re-Cyborg, and there was a division happening over the future of the company. Throughout the whole overseas development process, many involved with Ishimori Pro disliked the attempt to appeal to a Western audience, and thought the work being done overseas was a waste of time and money. DeSanto says Takigawa was his champion and shielded him from a lot of that negativity, and credits Takigawa as the only reason the project got as far as it did. In March of 2013, 2 months after the release of the Cyborg 009 graphic novel, Takigawa was phased out of his position, and the new EVP was one of the many of the mindset that 009 Re-Cyborg was the future that they should focus on promoting. The new EVP at Ishimori Pro killed the deal with Fox, claiming that Fox having the movie rights would prevent them from releasing Re-Cyborg, and Ishimori Pro shut the deal down and ceased all overseas development.
The other problem is they didn't understand Western business. Like, they thought if they were giving the property to 20th Century Fox, it meant Fox owned the property forever and they couldn't do anything with it, which was insane. Like even the Itochu, the parent company, were like helping me fight this. Like, they'd fly to LA and we take meetings, and I still had I think another year on my deal with them, and they just ignored me for a year and paid me.
The Kenji Kamiyama directed 009 Re-Cyborg was released in Japan on October 27, 2012, and was a box office hit in Asia. The Re in the title was meant to signify that this was a new beginning for the franchise, and the tagline for the film was, "It can't begin unless it ends." I admit it would be ironic to premiere this film, which is meant to act as a clean slate for the franchise, while another company in another country is pumping out films and graphic novels that are adapting old material. However, I personally find that old material more appealing than the contents of 009 Re-Cyborg or the 2016 follow-ups that are the Call of Justice films. DeSanto kept in touch with Masayasu Takigawa even after he left Itochu, and the two would meet in Japan and LA as both would frequently travel between the US and Japan for their work. While both men were enthusiastic about the project and look back on that time fondly, they acknowledged that the pieces aren't in place to try something like that in the current landscape of movies, television, and anime. But if Cyborg 009 has taught me anything, it's that no battle is ever the last.